And so you know, and so they said, oh, you want to write a happiness book? And I said, no, I don't want to write a happiness book. But it ended up that they wanted me to write a happiness book. And I felt like what I was seeing in the therapy room was really this rich, deep human experience. And it's full of humor, and it's full of sadness, and everything in between. And that's what I really wanted people to see, because I feel like in our culture, we see so much of, you know, like the social media version of life. And I wanted to show real life, because I think that it's so meaningful. And I think it reminds us of what's important and what matters to us.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, because the kind of exchange that I had kind of talks about something that you spoke about in the book, which is this idea of want and the speed of our lives, you know, and that we're instantly seeking that result.
Yeah.
And that psychotherapy, you know, kind of focuses on the way that we get in our own way, you know, which was, and the way that kind of the weapons we use against ourselves and each other in terms of the way that we behave, and how we can, you know, disarm ourselves in order to live more fully. Would you?
Yeah. You know, I write in the book about the difference between idiot compassion and wise compassion. And idiot compassion is what we do with our friends. So our friend says, like, this happened, or, you know, my spouse did this, or my partner did this, or my sibling or my mother or whomever did this. And we say, yeah, you know, you're right, they were wrong. And, you know, we just sort of back up their story, even though pretty much when you know your friends well, they'll tell you the same kind of story over and over. It's kind of like if a fight breaks out in every bar you're going to, maybe it's you. We don't say that to our friends. Therapy is different. Therapy offers not idiot compassion, but wise compassion, where we hold up a mirror to you to help you to see something about yourself that maybe you haven't been willing or able to see. And that's where the growth and transformation happen. That's where you can get out of these patterns, all of these things in your life where you're like, we keep getting in this argument, or this keeps happening to me. I want people to look at their role in the situation. Why does it keep happening to you? And what can you do about it?
And to give yourself the space and time to be able to see it and maybe react against it and then integrate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the reason that I tell the book in stories is because I feel like we can see ourselves most clearly through the lens of other people's stories. So if you say to somebody, you know, you're like this, or you do this, our instinct is to say, no, I don't. I'm not like that. I don't do that. We get really defensive, right? But if you're reading the book, so many readers have said, oh my God, I saw myself in every single person in this book, even though their lives look very different from mine. And so I think that when we can say to ourselves as we're reading the book, like, oh, I do that, or I've done that before, oh, I sometimes act like that, right? You learn so much about yourself.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of one of the successes of the book, is that you do have these different personalities that people can see either themselves or other people in, and it drives them along. But what I wanted to just touch back on is I think that's what surprised people about you being in therapy, is that people think that a therapist has it all together, right? So people find it surprising that you go to a therapist, and B, you're willing to discuss it and be, you know, and reveal your imperfections, if people assume that therapists are perfect in terms of, you know, living their lives. And
right. Well, you know, it's interesting because, you know, the book is being made into a television series. And one of the things that's really important to me about the TV series is that it doesn't sort of follow those media tropes of how therapists are portrayed, right? So you either see like the therapist who, you know, has their life totally together, and they're kind of like a robot. They're kind of like to everything, but you don't really get a sense of who they are as a person. And then the other trope is like the train wreck, you know, the therapist whose life is falling apart in every way. And, you know, neither of those reflects the therapists who are out there for the most part, right? Therapists in general, they're just regular people. And I think that it's important that we're regular people, because I think that we use our humanity in the therapy room all the time to help people through their struggles. We don't bring in our issues into the therapy room, but we certainly know what it's like to be a person in the world. And we use that to help people figure out how to move through their own struggles.
I definitely want to come back to the TV series, but first I want to make sure that people know about how you chose the patients in the book, and maybe give them a sense of what each one is like. And
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, I was very intentional about choosing the patients for the book, and I really wanted to choose people who seemed very different from one another. And then as you read the book, you come to see, wow, there are all these overlapping themes, there are all these overlapping struggles that you would never expect from these very, very seemingly different people. And that's, you know, a big theme in the book is that, you know, just how the same we all are underneath it all, and what we can learn from that. And so, you know, the first person you meet is John, and he is this, he's married, he's about 40, he has some kids, and he uh, has what we might call narcissistic tendencies. You know, he thinks that he's better than everybody else, and he's insulting to me, and he's coming in because he has insomnia and he needs help managing all of the quote unquote idiots in his life. And you come to see, you know, he's very unlikable at the beginning, and most people say that by the end of the book he's the person that they love the most, because there's, you know, obviously a lot of pain there that he's trying to keep people at bay with his obnoxiousness. And there's a lot of depth there, and a lot of relatable, I think, you know, a lot of relatable pain there. And then then you meet Julie, who is this young woman who comes back from her honeymoon, and she thinks that she might be pregnant, which she's hoping for, and it turns out that this funky thing that she felt in her breast is not a sign of pregnancy, but it is cancer. And the doctors say that she has a really positive prognosis and she'll be fine. And she is fine from the breast cancer, but when she recovers from the breast cancer and then she gets a sign-off scan to see if she can get pregnant, they discover this completely what they think is unrelated cancer that is going to kill her. And they say she has between 1 year and 10 years. And, you know, obviously the difference between 1 year and 10 years is enormous. And so really that's a story about how do you live your life when you have this deadline. And the fact of the matter is that life has a 100% mortality rate. We're all going to die, and we just don't know when or how yet. And so I think one of the things Julie says at one point is, you know, why do people need a terminal diagnosis to really live their lives the way they want to live them? And I think that's the question that she forces us to ask throughout the book. And then you meet Rita, who is about to turn 70, and she's had some marriages that didn't work out, and her adult children are estranged from her because of the way that they felt she didn't protect them as children. And she really wants their forgiveness. She's extremely lonely, and doesn't really have a community, doesn't really have friends, and she's really just like bathing in shame. And you know, she comes to me and says if life doesn't get better within the year when she turns 70, she doesn't want to live it anymore. And you can see that it's never too late to change. I think with Rita, what I love about her story is not only did she change, but she changed way more than I think I had ever anticipated. And it was a great lesson for me about the nature of change, and when people are ready, what they're willing to do, and how they're willing to go outside of their comfort zone and completely, you know, take risks and do things to make a life where there really hadn't been one. And you can see what happens with her children as well, which is really extraordinary, I think, because of something that she does differently, not because of anything they're doing differently. And then the last person is Charlotte, who's at the polar opposite end of life as Rita is. She's in her 20s. She keeps sort of, you know, dating the wrong guys and can't understand why. She drinks too much, doesn't really acknowledge that she has a problem with numbing her feelings with alcohol. And for her, it was really about, you know, not realizing that she was repeating a pattern from childhood that kept getting her in the same situation over and over that would guarantee her own unhappiness. So, so those are sort of the four main people. There are other people that we meet in the book, but those are the four main stories that we follow.
And then there's you and your therapist, Wendell. Yeah. So let's tell them about
And then
Wendell.
there's me. And I come to therapy because I'm a single mom, and I meet this guy, and we're dating for a couple of years, and then we're planning to get married. And then he announces out of the blue one night that he's decided he doesn't, and my kid at the time was 8, that he didn't want to live with a kid under his roof for the next 10 years. And this was news to me. So I go to therapy because I think that my therapist is going to, you know, help me through this sort of shock, and also validate my version of the story. And one of the things that I think you see a lot of, and maybe you should talk to someone, and also in my TED talk that I did on this topic, was this idea that we're all unreliable narrators. That doesn't mean that we're purposely misleading. It means that we tell a story through our particular lens, through our particular perspective. And, who are the main characters? Who are the supporting characters? Is the protagonist moving forward? Is the protagonist going in circles? What are you leaving in? What are you leaving out? And it turns out, I learned through my therapy, that I actually had a pretty good idea that he was not a kid person, but I didn't want to pay attention to that. He never told me, but I saw it and I chose to ignore it. And so I think that, the way we narrate our stories ends up really affecting our lives. And you can see that in every single one of the patients in the book, including me.
And you talk about editing your story. Explain what you mean by that.
By ending my story?
No, editing your story.
Oh, editing my story,
editing.
Yes. Okay. I think that it's interesting because I have a writing background. So before I became a therapist, I spent, and I still am, but I spent many years as a journalist and as an author. And before that, I worked in the entertainment business. I worked in film development, and then I worked at NBC. I was a junior network executive there, and I worked on shows like ER and Friends, and that was how I got
fascinating background. You describe it as false starts, but I mean, hardly false starts. It's a fascinating journey.
Well, right. I think, everything that I did, I feel like was related to story and the human condition. So when I worked at NBC and I was working on ER, I loved those fictional stories. But when I was in a real ER, supposedly doing research for the show, I really fell in love with the real stories and the real people. And, nobody goes to an emergency room because they expected something to happen. It's always an inflection point. And so I ended up going to medical school. I went up to Stanford. And when I got there, a lot of people were talking about at the time this newfangled thing called managed care, and they were saying, you're not going to be able to practice the kind of medicine that you want to practice, which is really steeped in story, right? It was steeped in kind of like being the family doctor who guides people through their lives. And so I started writing when I was in medical school, and I left to become a journalist where I felt like I could help to tell people's stories. And when I ultimately left journalism to become a therapist, I felt like I could do more than tell people's stories. I could help people to edit their stories. And so even though when people come into my office, they're coming to see a therapist, they're also coming to see an editor, because what I'm doing is I'm helping them with that rough first draft that they bring in, that faulty narrative that they bring in, and I'm helping them to see it differently so that they aren't stuck, because the whole reason they came to me is that they got stuck in the plot somewhere. And so how do we move them forward to the next chapter?
And another thing that, the stories definitely highlight each of the characters, but the stories and profiles, they dovetail with each other, and they it's really beautiful. I just finished the book, so I'm still digesting it, but I realize how, your story is informed by other people's stories, and you learn from theirs, and so it's just really, it's beautifully constructed that way.
Yeah, I feel like every chapter is in conversation with the chapter that precedes it and follows it. And, I say in the book that we are mirrors reflecting mirrors, right? That we are most revealed in relationship with others. And I think that, every story and every person's story informs every other person's story. And you see that very clearly in the book.
And tell us what it was like being a patient to another therapist.
Well, I love that relationship, and that's why I wanted to write about it. So my therapist, who I call Wendell in the book, he was much more experienced than I was at the time that I went to therapy. I was a relatively new therapist, and he was somebody who had been doing it for 20 years at that point. And, and he was very unconventional and very quirky. And I don't mean that he was, being inappropriate with boundaries or anything like that. It's just that he brought his whole personality into the room. And you can see that he doesn't let me get away with anything. And he really calls me on all of my contradictions and my, the things that I'm holding back, and the things that I'm responsible for. And I love, like, at one point he says to me, you remind me of this cartoon, and it's of a prisoner shaking the bars, desperately trying to get out. But on the right and the left, it's open. no bars. In other words, the prisoner wasn't actually in prison. And that's how a lot of us feel. We feel so trapped by our circumstances, by people in our lives, by, our past, by, whatever it might be. And what he was saying was, the bars are open. Why aren't you walking around the bars? And the reason that most of us don't is because with freedom comes responsibility. And if we walk around those bars, right, if we walk around the side, we are responsible for our lives, for our choices, for everything that happens. And sometimes it feels easier, even though it's not, to just shake the bars and be a victim and say, you know what, I'm trapped here. I'm trapped. There's nothing that can help. And so I think, he was very much somebody who would call you on those those contradictions and really ask you to examine your life in a different way. And I think that's the best thing that a therapist can do for you.
Yeah, like when he kicks you and he says, well, it seems like you like to suffer, right? And it was such a wonderful line when he said, we all have pain. I mean, you have pain, I understand that, but you don't have to suffer so much.
Right. He was saying there's a difference between pain and suffering, and that, we all experience pain. If you're human, you're going to experience pain at some point in your life, but you don't have to create your own suffering. And by that, it was because I was, like Google stalking the ex-boyfriend and making up all these stories in my head. Oh, he's posting, pictures of food in restaurants. Well, how can he even eat, now that we've broken up and I'm in such pain, or, just all the stories I would make up about like whatever I found. And he was saying, why are you spending your emotional real estate on this? Why are you spending your time Googling him? It's not helpful to you. It just hurts you more. It makes you suffer. So it exacerbates the pain.
And you write about why we resist change, even when it's good for us. So what makes change so hard, and how much change can we realistically expect from therapy?
Yeah, I think tremendous change. I mean, I think you can see that in several of the patients in the book. And I also give an example of somebody who wasn't ready to change and how the therapy did not work. And so I think that the thing about change is that most people who come to therapy want something in their lives to change. That's why they came there. And so when somebody comes in, I'm looking not just for what's not working, but I'm also scanning for strengths. And one strength is they picked up the phone. And I want to know not just why are you here, but why this day, this week, this month did you pick up the phone and call me when maybe this problem has been going on for a long time. And so I'm scanning for sort of readiness, right? And I think that for people to come in, they usually say, I want something to change. And there are people who say, I want to change. And there are people who say, I want other people out there to change. And I think that the more that people are ready to take responsibility for their, what's not working in their lives, and even if that means, acting differently with the people who are difficult. So I'm not saying there aren't difficult people out there. I remember when I was training, one of my supervisors said, before diagnosing someone with depression, make sure they aren't surrounded by assholes, right? So it's like, yes, there are difficult people out there, but then what is your response to those people, right? What is your role in whatever the difficulty is? And so I think that change is really hard because with change comes loss. And what we lose is we lose the familiar. And the familiar is a very strong pull because we know it, right? It's comfortable, even if it's not, if it's making us miserable. And so when you make a change, you move into this uncertain place. You've never experienced this new thing before. And humans don't do well with uncertainty. So sometimes we would rather stay in the familiar situation that's not working than to make a change and kind of deal with the anxiety of the uncertainty.
And how people define change. I mean, walking in the door, they may be thinking they want another person to change in their life, and then
right. There's a whole chapter in the book called How Humans Change, and basically it talks about how people don't just change. It might look like they just made a change one day, but there are so many steps. There are actual steps that go into making change. There's sort of like the pre-contemplation stage where you don't even know that you're thinking about making a change. That was
fascinating. I'd never heard of these stages before. Yeah.
Right. So there's all these different stages. There's the preparation stage where you're preparing to change, but you're not really ready to make the change yet. There's the action phase where you actually make the change, and that's what people see. But then there's the most important stage of change, and that stage is the maintenance stage. And that's how do you maintain the change once you've made it. And the problem with the maintenance stage is that A, it's the hardest, but B, people get really confused about what it means. So a lot of people think, oh, you know, like, let's say that it's like you make a New Year's resolution and you say, okay, I want to eat healthier. And so you start to eat healthier. And then one day you're like, oh my God, I ate like 3 pieces of cake. Okay. So people think, oh, well, I failed and now I'm done. And, you know, that was a failure. No, the maintenance phase has room built into it for you're going to regress, you're going to go back because it's hard to change. And so what people really need when they make a change is they need self-compassion, because self-compassion really helps you to weather the, you know, what happens during the maintenance phase and helps you to get back up on the horse again when you slip up. And I think that what happens is people instead, they self-flagellate. And what I always say to people is self-compassion and kindness are going to hold you far more accountable and help you to get back up, you know, and get back on track than self-flagellating. Self-flagellating just puts you into a shame spiral, and then you don't even want to think about the change anymore.
Catherine is saying in the chat, this is so insightful. I love the perspective you're sharing about therapy, Laura. You're providing those aha moments. And I just want to add, this is my, this is my printout. Oh, can you see with the virtual? Yeah, you see.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I still, when I read a book, there's, you know, I'm still figuring out a way to digest it in a way that I, you know, stays with me, because you have the quotes that zing by, and then, so at any rate, that was just to show you how many aha moments are in the book for those of you that are thinking of reading it. So,
well, you know, it's interesting because so many people post on, you know, on Instagram or Facebook. They post like pictures of their copies of the book with all the different colored Post-its that they have in it, and they're beautiful. I mean, they look like works of art. So I really appreciate that people are getting so much out of it.
Right, right. Yeah, I just need to transcribe all of the Post-its now and highlights, you know, it's just something. It's kind of like what you said about medical school, that it's, you know, see one, do one, teach one. And this is kind of like there are multiple stages of reading. And if you want it to stay with you longer, I think it does involve a digestion stage and a processing stage. So, so at any rate, you tell us about the TV series, what you're most excited about. Eva Longoria has optioned it and is producing it now. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm really excited. You know, I really want to be able to, I feel like in the book, I've really brought these topics that we ordinarily don't necessarily talk about and just brought them out into the open to normalize them. And I feel like the TV show will do that even more. So I'm really excited to adapt this for the, you know, for the television audience.
So are you a writer on the series?
I'm a producer on the series.
Oh, you're a producer. Oh, that's fantastic. And how are you finding that experience? Well,
well, so I came from television. So for me, It's kind of full circle because, you know, I used to, in my 20s, I worked in television, and now, of course, the landscape is so different. Back when I worked in television in my 20s, film was the kind of prestige job. And so when I switched from film to television, everyone thought, you know, why would you do that? You're going backward. But now when you look at it, I think, you know, so much great TV is out there. I mean, really smart television. So, you know, that's why we're all sort of binge watching all these shows.
Yeah. So it means you're not writing, but you have input into the character.
Yeah, I'm involved creatively in the project.
Okay. Okay. I am going to catch up with the questions in a little bit. So, but I have 2 more questions, and then I will go through these. So just so you guys know. So you also write for the Atlantic, the Dear Therapist column. And you host a new podcast, Dear Therapist. And how do those two gigs relate to what you do as a therapist, to your work as a therapist?
Yeah, so, you know, I really feel like through the book, through my TED Talk, through my weekly Atlantic column, which comes out on Mondays, and then now my weekly Dear Therapist podcast, which comes out on Thursdays. I feel like people are getting sort of a window into themselves, you know, in whatever way. And so I feel like, you know, when I'm answering a question in the advice column, I'm answering the letter for the person who wrote the letter, but I'm not saying, I don't give very prescriptive advice. I'm not like, don't talk to your mother-in-law, those kinds of, kind of advice that you might get somewhere else, which is useful advice. But I feel like what I'm doing is I'm helping them to see their issue the way that a therapist would, like how, if you brought your dilemma to a therapist, what would the therapist help you to see? And you only have the space of a column to do it. So it's kind of like a consultation. And I feel like what's great about it is that people can relate to what I say, because it relates to the letter, but it also relates much more broadly to other themes in our lives. And the same thing with the podcast. So when you listen to the podcast, you might not have the same issue as the person who we're doing a session with. So basically, people come on the podcast. I have a co-host, Guy Winch. We both met through our TED Talks, and we are co-therapists on this. And we talk about the problem, and you can hear how therapists discuss a problem. And then we bring the person on. We do a session with them, and you can hear how we help them in one session get to a new place. And then we leave them with actionable advice, and they have 1 week to try the advice. And then they have to report back to us to tell us how it went, whether it worked and whether it didn't. And then we kind of learn a lot from, what worked, what didn't, and why. And you don't get that in the columns because, obviously, like, people might write to me and say, here's what I did after you gave the advice in the column, but we don't share that with readers. So what I love about the podcast is you get to find out what happened. And that very much mirrors the therapy room, because every week I find out, well, what happened this week and how did it work, right? So now people are getting that experience as well.
Wow, that's super interesting. What a unique approach. And also, you're incredibly busy. I mean, yeah. You must just like doing it a lot. I mean, you wrote articles during medical school. I mean, you've always been very prolific in what you've done, so.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have a passion for what I'm doing, and I feel like it's, I think more than ever right now in the world, we really need this. And so for me, it's really all just different lenses into the same thing, as sort of getting this message out and helping people to live better lives. That's ultimately the goal.
I have a question that I'm kind of toying with, which is a question about this year, and like a pandemic question, but also like a 2020 has been one hell of a year question, which is, has there been a book that you have sought out that has kind of helped you through aspects of the pandemic, or something that this year that you found really challenging?
That's such a good question. So much of what I end up reading are books that haven't come out yet, because I'm, maybe, endorsing them or whatever it might be, or people send them to me. And so these books were written kind of before this. But I think the answer is yes, in the sense of, I think that anything that really resonates with me is going to reveal some sort of both deep psychological truths in terms of, what's going on with the person, but also deep cultural truths. Because we do not live in isolation. We live in the context of our culture. We live in the context of our community. And so I think that the books that, they haven't come out yet, so it's not gonna be helpful for me to name them, but I think that the ones that really talk about our place in the world and how we sort of navigate our place in the world, and also people really trying to leave the world a better place than they came into it, right? Those are really fascinating stories to me, and inspiring.
So since we have quite a lot of comments and questions, I'd like to go to the questions now, just to make sure that we can get to them. The first is, and this might, fill in maybe the Dear Atlantic section of your work, possibly, which is a question from Judith, which I'll just read the question. I have encouraged my 91-year-old mother to talk to someone, but she refuses. She lives alone, fires all the aides I hire to get to assist her, and is angry and hateful to everyone. She still drives, makes demands on everyone, lies, manipulates to get sympathy, and is still half able to live independently. She's fallen twice, broken bones, and refuses to do rehab or work with anyone who can help. Any advice? I'm sure.
Well, there's so much going on there that I don't think that anything I would say in one sentence would be would really, I'd need to know so much more about the situation. But I do think that when people try to get somebody to get help and they're resistant to it, usually it's because that person feels shame. The way that they're being approached, they feel like you're saying to them, like, something is wrong with you. And even though you're not using those words. And so I think that, the best way to help somebody to see that maybe they can, get some help is to talk to them about, I love you so much. And I see how you're struggling. And you can even talk about, when I was struggling, I went to go talk to somebody because, therapy is almost like getting a really good second opinion on your life from someone who's not in your life. And you can acknowledge the people that you love. Like, I'm not a good person to do, to help because I'm biased, right? And we have a history and all of that. But I think the message is really one of love. Like, I care about you. I love you. It's hard for me to see you suffer. And I think that maybe you don't have to suffer so much. But really, it's up to them. You can't make people do something like that. So the message just consistently has to be one of, I care about you, I love you. And then when they bring you all their problems, they're complaining to you, you don't engage in that. And the more that you cut off, and I don't mean cut off like you leave them hanging, but the more that you kind of say, wow, I'm really sorry that happened. Maybe you should talk to someone, right? Then they'll sort of get the message that, oh, maybe there's something else because they're not getting that need met from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is about, because I know a friend of mine has a very similar problem, that stage of life where a parent is living independently, but it's at the very end, and it's kind of making that transition and when they're resisting it, I think is kind of what it's about. But yeah. So question from Jennifer. I love the book and I'm grateful for the opportunity to hear from Lori directly. I'd love to hear your suggestions about how to find a therapist. A society of some sort, and how do you find or know that the person is right for you?
Yeah. So for those of you who read the book, the way I found a therapist, maybe wasn't the best way, in the sense of I wasn't honest about it. I wasn't, I said to a colleague, like, this is for a friend. And I also wanted someone who I thought would sort of corroborate my version of events. I think that the best way to find a therapist is word of mouth. And I think that's really important because you can say to a friend, and not the friend who's like been going to therapy for years and years and nothing has changed, not that friend. The friend where you're like, wow, that person really seems like they've made changes. Wow, that person seems much happier now. That person seems like, they used to be this way and now I've really seen them change. That person just seems lighter now. That's the person. And you want to say like, hey, a lot of people don't want you sort of sharing their therapist. So you might say, could you ask your therapist if they have a recommendation for me? I get that all the time. People will come to me and say, my friend really wants a therapist recommendation. I really wants to go to therapy. Who do you recommend? And I will give good recommendations. And the thing that people need to remember about getting, going to therapy for the first time, or even going to a new therapist for the first time, is that it is not, a lot of people think like you're going to go into that session and you're either going to be in therapy with this person or you're going to not go to therapy. And that's just not true. It's a consultation. It's an opportunity for you to say, how do I feel sitting in the room with this person? Do I feel like this person gets it? Did I feel comfortable talking to this person? And also, do I think this person is going to hold me accountable? Do I think that this person, and, in the first session, we're not going to do too much with that because really we're just trying to kind of get to know you a little bit. But, will this person ask me questions that are going to make me think? And that's going to be important. So, go for a first session. And if you say yes to those questions, I would go back for a second session, and you'll know after a few sessions whether you're in therapy with that person. And if not, don't ghost the therapist. Don't just like not show up or say, oh, I'm really busy or work got in the way. You can say, I'm not. You can go into a session and say, I don't know why this is, but I'm not sure this is the right match. And sometimes it just isn't the right match. And maybe they can refer somebody else to you. But sometimes there's something going on with you where maybe you would go to 3 therapists and the same thing would happen. You'd be like, yeah, I'm just not sure. And maybe there's something about you, and maybe that's a really good opportunity to figure out what that is.
Okay, so this kind of perhaps answers the question that Sally's asking, which is, what advice would you give to people who have read your book and are second guessing the approach of their therapist?
I would bring it up with your therapist. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You'll have a really great conversation about the work that you're doing together, about the relationship between the two of you, and about what your fantasy is, about what would be different in the therapy, and then why that's not happening if it's not happening. And you'll learn a lot about yourself and yourself in relation to this person.
Yeah, those are tough conversations. Yeah.
But I think, you know, I find that so ironic, and I also get it, but I find it ironic because I feel like therapy is like the one place where it is not only allowed, but it is encouraged to have these kinds of conversations. And yet people will talk about the most intimate details of every other relationship, except for the one that's actually happening in that room. And yet the one that's happening in that room is a microcosm of those relationships out there. And if you're able to talk about the hard things in that room with that therapist, you'll be able to talk about the hard things with the people out in your life. And so it's so important to be able to practice by bringing it up with your therapist. It's the safest possible place to bring things up that are maybe feel awkward.
And the series is going to be on ABC?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And Sally asked another good question, which is, with the animosity prevalent in our presidential race, do you have any tips for both sides of the aisles on how not to feel anger towards the other side?
Yeah, I think that maybe watching my TED Talk would be really helpful, because really what it's about is perspective taking. There's also one episode of the podcast. It's about an affair, and somebody who left his wife for a coworker, and he's really having trouble with perspective taking. And we actually take him through all these this exercise. And I think that when you feel like you can't understand how somebody is thinking or feeling something that's very different from you, doing those exercises and perspective taking, you don't have to agree with their perspective, but it will help you to see that it'll help you to not be so rigid about, you know, how you judge them for having that perspective.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So tell us about how you address the confidentiality of the people in the book.
Yeah. So that was obviously one of the most important aspects of the book was, you know, you can't do the book if you're going to compromise anything that happened between you and these patients. So I made sure that, first of all, these are people that I wasn't seeing regularly on a weekly basis anymore, because I didn't feel like I could go into the therapy room, do the weekly work. And even if I was writing about things that happened 5 years before, I still felt like those lines would be blurred. And so I needed that separation. And then of course I had to get permission. And then of course I had to change, especially in this world of, you know, the internet and Google, I had to change anything that you could possibly find on the internet. So it's very funny to see on social media, like everybody's trying to guess, like, you know, who everybody is. And thank goodness we did our job.
Yeah, you did it very well. Right. I would think that John's TV show would be particularly challenging. So Leslie asks, it seems to me that the common theme in this book is dealing with life's unpredictability, one's own death, the death of loved ones, disappointment and future plans, being let down. Would you agree?
I think it's certainly, those are big themes in the book, but I also feel like it's a lot about joy and about how we get in our own way when it comes to joy, that somehow joy is something that we all say that we want, and yet we're so afraid of it. We're so afraid of getting there, of getting it. We're so afraid of it going away once we have it. And I think ultimately what this book is about is how to love and be loved. I think it's about how we grow in connection with others. And it's about, you know, all the things that we do that get in our way as we try to love other people and be loved by other people.
Mm. And Lori asked, will there be aspects of the TV series that will address the stigma of mental health still prevalent today and inflating that shame you referred to?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the fact of having a TV show does a lot, you know, in that direction. I mean, I think that the more that we can normalize this idea of, you know, our emotional health matters. And, you know, it's so interesting to me that we treat our physical health so differently from how we treat our psychological health. And, you know, even now with COVID, you know, we're so focused on protecting our physical immune systems, but how do we protect our psychological immune systems? And I think just even in non-COVID times, you know, when something happens to our bodies, right? Like you break an arm, you don't say, oh, well, other people have it worse. Like some people have terminal cancer, so I'm not going to go to the doctor for this broken arm that I have, right? But we do that with our psychological health. We might say, yeah, you know, I'm anxious or I'm sad or I can't sleep or I'm having this relational difficulty. But, you know, other people have, you know, have it so much worse. And so I'm not going to go get this checked out. And so what happens is, you know, it's like if you are feeling some chest pain, you're going to go to the cardiologist and get it checked out before you have a massive heart attack. If you feel some discomfort emotionally, usually people don't go and get it checked out and they don't land in my office until they're having the equivalent of an emotional heart attack. And at that point, first of all, it's harder to treat because now you've waited so long and now we could have preventatively treated it and now we're treating something different and then we have to backtrack. But the other part of it is you've suffered unnecessarily for so long. So, you know, I really want that message out there that there is no, you know, people think that, oh, it's a sign of weakness to get help. No, actually, it's a sign of strength. It's a sign of strength to say, I prioritize my emotional health. And it doesn't just affect me, it affects my family, my friends, my community, and society at large.
Tell us the name of the podcast again.
It's called the podcast is called Dear Therapist, plural.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And Judy's asking, can you talk about the funeral party?
Yeah, so this is about Julie, and she's the young woman who just got married, comes back and finds out that she has cancer. And it was really interesting because she asked me if I would stay with her until she died. And I told her, you know, I didn't have that kind of experience doing that with someone her age. And that was exactly why she wanted to do that with me. She didn't want someone from what she called, you know, the cancer team. And part of the agreement that I made with her was that she really wanted me to go to her funeral. And there are all these questions, I think, that come up for therapists around, you know, sort of what are the lines? And, you know, do you go to a patient's funeral? And of course you can't, because of confidentiality. When I was at the funeral, I couldn't tell people that I had been her therapist. So, you know, a lot of times you'll be at the funeral and some people start talking to you and they say, well, how do you know this person? And somebody did, as I was trying to kind of sneak out at the end after I had been there. And it was incredibly, by the way, moving ceremony. And I learned so much about her life, surprisingly, that I didn't already know. Yeah, I thought I knew so much about her because we had this incredibly intimate relationship. But then you see the people who actually lived her life with her and, you know, the things that they said and all the memories that they had. And I got this, you know, this much broader, more expansive perspective on her. And then when I was trying to leave, you know, somebody said like, oh, you know, how did you know Julie? And it just came out. I said, I was a friend. And it was something that came out to protect her confidentiality, but I realized it was also true that we had become friends, that I felt like she was a friend. And I think that therapists are so worried about things like that. You know, how can you go to the funeral or how can you consider somebody a friend? But I think that we're human. And I think that that's what's great about it, that you have to have boundaries. You have to have, you know, there is sort of like, it is a clinical relationship, but it's also a very human relationship. And I think that it's to our detriment if we forget that.
Lindsay has, I believe, a COVID question, if I'm reading it correctly. Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong. But so what is your suggestion for trying to encourage loved ones to respect that you don't want to see them, because they see too many people outside of their social bubble. By social bubble, I think she means COVID bubble. Are you there? I think we lost you.
Yeah, I don't know. I need something happened here. Hold on.
Oh.
I don't know. Let me get back to the Zoom. There we go. Okay, there we go. I had to take something off the screen and I got lost Zoom.
Okay. You want to repeat the question?
Yeah.
Okay. What is your suggestion about trying to encourage loved ones you respect that you to respect, sorry, that you don't want to see them because they see too many people outside of their COVID bubble, you know, outside of their pod, and thinking about suggestions for the holidays?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think you can just be honest with them and you have to be able to tolerate their disappointment. And I see this in couples a lot too, right? With the non-COVID times, like, you know, people have different ideas about things and they feel like the only way that they're going to get through this difference is that they're going to agree. I think you have to understand that you're not going to agree about this and that the other person, you know, might be disappointed in you. And then how do you tolerate that person's disappointment when you say, you know what, we're keeping our bubble like this and we're not ready to expand it. You might not agree with it. You might be disappointed or sad about it. And I am really sorry that you're sad about this. And I miss you too, you know, and let them know I really miss you and I love you. And this is really hard for me too. And I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Susan asks, in therapy, do you agree it is important for the client to feel safe? And if someone doesn't know the experience of safety, you as a therapist can model what is safe in the sense that it doesn't mean removing a threat. This is from Susan. She might be a social worker. I mean, it kind of sounds like she's a social worker. Or
Right. I think what the safety is it's that, you know, there's a space for you to feel what you're feeling. And that I think that a lot of people who feel like they don't have that, you know, to use the word safety outside of the therapy room are people who maybe as kids got talked out of their feelings. And so, you know, as parents, I think it's really relevant to what's going on now too, that so often our kids will say something to us like, you know, I'm really sad about this, or I'm really worried about this. And we say, oh, don't be sad. Hey, let's go have ice cream. Or like, you know, oh, don't worry about that. Really, you know, there's nothing to worry about. And right there, you've just shut them down and invalidated them. And so what do we do when we get shut down like that? We feel like, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to feel sad, or maybe I can't even trust whether I'm worried or not, right? And so what happens is, I think, you know, the things that, oh, now this beeping is going to happen. It's technology. You know what, can I turn that off?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, sorry about that.
If anybody else has a question, put it in the text, because we've got just a couple minutes. And it's just easier for me to see than kind of unmuting you and finding you.
Okay. So what I was saying is that I think, you know, when our kids say something like, I'm really struggling with this, you know, instead of trying to fix it for them or solve it or talk them out of their feeling like, oh, it'll be better soon, or, you know, whatever you say to them, say, yeah, I can see you're really sad. Tell me more. Or, yeah, I know you're really worried about this. Tell me more. Those 3 words, tell me more, are magic. Because what they do is they create that safe space that we were talking about just a second ago in the therapy room. Tell me more. I want to hear your experience. I'm interested in your experience. I'm not interested in erasing your experience because it makes me uncomfortable. I'm not interested in pretending you don't feel the way you feel because it makes me uncomfortable, right? I want you to be able to know that your feelings are powerful and they matter, and your feelings are like a compass. They tell you what direction to go in. And so if you teach kids, this is important that you're feeling sad because it's giving you information. And now you can try to figure out, okay, what do I do with this sadness, right? Same with anxiety, even things like envy. People are so afraid to say, you know, I'm envious of this. I always say, follow your envy. It tells you what you want. So instead of pretending that you don't feel that way, say, oh, this is giving me information. It means there's something missing in my life that I really want, or there's some dream that I'm not acting on. And so what can I do? How can I use this feeling to motivate me to pay attention to something that I want in my life? And so with the therapy room, what is the safe space? We're creating that environment where we want you to be able to feel what you feel, to access your feelings, and to use your feelings in a productive way.
Yes, this year it seems that that would be incredibly helpful. So Samuel is asking, I think, a professional question. What are your thoughts on naive perspective and the phenomenon when someone awakens to reality and begins taking and welcoming accountability and responsibility?
So the question is, what are my feelings about when people become accountable, or?
What are your thoughts on naive perspective and the phenomenon when someone awakens to reality and begins talking and welcoming accountability and responsibility? I don't know. Samuel, if you've got more thoughts on this, help clarify
Yes.
it. Ah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hello, I'm really enjoying the content, the questions. This format is wonderful. Naive perspective is something that I'm studying, as I'm really a big fan of emotional intelligence and empathy. And I've come to appreciate naive perspective that many adults obtain throughout their lives. But with naive perspective, basically thinking that one thing is one way when it's truly not, based on our experiences and our confirmation bias and ways in which we go about obtaining and seeking those things. I wonder, with your experiences, when a person you've come in contact with reaches that realization, what are some of the things that seem to stand out consistently? So just a question that ran across my mind.
Yeah. I think when people go from a place of not being able to see the broader perspective and then finally they see something, I think it's a moment in time for more changes to happen. So they might see it in one instance, but I think the question is, can they apply that to other instances in their life? And that's where you really see people, who make use of the work. It's not just realizing one thing, it's realizing that there are other perspectives that you haven't been seeing this whole time, and it opens your eyes. And so I think what a lot of therapy is having people open their eyes to things that were right in front of them the whole time, but that they just never saw.
And I think the last question, which is, do you have any advice for aspiring therapists?
I love this work. I think that, I think you have to want to do this kind of work, but I think it's so funny to me for people who aren't therapists, they'll say, well, isn't it depressing listening to people's problems all day? I don't think that's the job description at all. I think the job description is you're sitting with another human a few feet in non-COVID times, a few feet away from you, and you are experiencing this shared humanity together, and you're helping them to live their life differently. And when you really have that experience of seeing people who come to you and then they say to you later, wow, this never would have happened, or I never would have had this, or my life would have been completely different if I hadn't done this work. It's the most gratifying, meaningful work in my opinion. And so I really enjoy it. And I think that one of the things you have to really do if you're an aspiring therapist is make sure that you really like this work. Make sure that you do the work on yourself, because you won't be able to be a good therapist if you aren't doing the work on yourself. And then also make sure that self-care is part of your routine from the very beginning. Like, don't schedule 6 people in a row with no breaks and no food and no bathroom and all that. And I know that sounds like the nitty-gritty, but when you think about it, these are the things. How are you taking care of yourself? Make sure you have a life outside of the therapy room that is rich and full. And if you have all of those things in place and this is your passion, then, welcome to the profession.
All right, well, Lori, this has been fantastic, a wonderful conversation. I want to, before we let you go, I just want to let you guys know that we are giving away 5 copies of the book. So if you would like a copy and you haven't read the book yet, stay on and I'll pick 5 of you. But Lori, I just want to thank you so much for this talk. It's been really wonderful.
Oh, well, thank you so much for the conversation. It was my pleasure.
Right.
Our pleasure.
Okay, so I'm just going to go to gallery view and we're going to say, all right. So I think I saw, let me see. Okay, we got a lot of no cameras on. That's okay.
Do you know the next book you're going to do this with?
Oh, I do. I do. Yes, 1 second. I'm going to announce it tomorrow by email,
Okay.
but it is my camera on? Yeah, speaker view. Okay, here we are. This stupid virtual Renegade Women in Films and Television, which is next Tuesday. The author is going to talk to us about this book. No, sorry, 2 Tuesdays from now. And then next Tuesday is the new Chardonnay, which is from a journalist who is talking about the impact of the increasing legalization of marijuana. And she does a series of profiles. So that is next Tuesday at 7.
Thank you.
Yes. But I'm going to send out, so obviously I'm assuming that you're on our mailing list. If not, there's a sign up on the Facebook page. And I'll have kind of a summary of upcoming events, so you can make sure to RSVP to all of them. So let me pick some winners here. Renee Gordon. Renee, you hear me? Renee, just chat me your mailing address or email me at Pauline.
Are you saying I'm here? I'm trying to get off of mute. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi. So you want a copy of the book? You are one. So I just need your mailing address. So you can email me at pauline@bookmovement.com, PAULINE, or or just put it in the chat right now.
I can put it in. I can direct chat you if you want.
Exactly. This is some advanced Zooming here.
Okay. Okay. Yes, I'm putting it in the chat right now.
Okay, great. All right. I thought I saw a fellow book club. Patty, are you there, or did you get off? Patty got off. She has the book. Okay. It was a neighbor who I thought, but I think she's read the book already. All right, Sally Kelly. Sally, so yeah, that's you. I'm writing down your name. And so same thing, email me or direct message me. And Heather Nash. Yeah. Okay. And let's see who else. I got the third screen here. And Ashley Fromm, if you are still with us.
Yay, I'm here.
All right, great. What are we at? 1, 2, 3, 4. We have one more. One more. Same thing. Just DM me your mailing address. And then Jay McDermott. I don't know what the J stand for. Yeah, that's right. I love seeing the surprises.
Hi, I'm here. Hi.
All right. So I'll stay on for your DMs for your mailing addresses. But thanks to all of you. I hope you make it next week. People have different reactions to this book, but I think it's super interesting to see. I love seeing like frontiers. You know, I loved seeing the development of the internet and development of apps, and this is kind of this new frontier of this new industry. So, but it's not just a business book. I think that there's a lot of repercussions on society and all sorts of things. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation. So I hope you guys liked it tonight. And thank you so much. It's great to see your faces. And I hope you come back. All right.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Judith, yeah, there's going to be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne.
I love the book. And I love the discussion. The discussion was fabulous.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Thank you. Yeah, she was very good.
So are you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. I enjoy them. I really enjoy it. Judith, it's going to be on Facebook. It's on Facebook, record on Facebook, so you can play it back whenever you want on our Facebook page. So I see, I'm looking for addresses now. Okay. Renee, let me make sure I see Renee. Yep, Renee Gordon. Okay, check. Sally Kelly. Gotcha. Right.
Pauline, sorry, I missed this whole thing, but what are you asking for addresses for?
Oh, I selected 5 people to win the book.
Oh, okay.
I selected 5 winners. So hopefully next time.
Mhm. Okay, thanks.
All right. Ashley. Okay, got you. And then Jay McDermott. Okay. There, I got all of you. All right, so I'm going to stay on just to copy these addresses down. But thanks very much for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and if you have any, feedback or questions or anything, just let me know. Now that I'm.
Will do. Pauline, I'm gonna send you my email. Can you send me that invite for next week as well with the link?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I'll make sure you're on our mailing list.
All righty.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening,
All
everyone.
right, you too.
Pauline, I don't know if you can hear me. This is
Yes.
Judith. Hi, is it going to be available anywhere other than Facebook? Believe it or not, I don't use Facebook.
Yes, it is. I'll put it on, we have a blog, so I can put the recording, I can embed it on a post. And
Okay, well, bring it over.
yeah, and I'll put it on the, I'll put it in the same email where I'm doing listing the upcoming events. How about that?
How do I find it?
You're on our mailing list? You get our newsletter?
This is the first time someone forwarded this to me, so
Oh, okay. Do you know how to chat in here? Do you know how to chat me?
okay.
Judith?
Yes.
I can't hear you anymore.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit more.
Not muted.
All right, why don't you email me at pauline@bookmovement.com, your email address, and I'll add you to the mailing list, okay?
Great. Thank you.
Okay, there you go. There you are.
Thank you very much.
Sure. And Jay McDermott, so it's okay if we just send it to where are you? Are you still there? No, you're gone. Okay.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Oh, okay. It's so if I just use the J, they'll know who to send it to.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. 1, 2.
I guess I sent that address to the whole world, didn't I? I intended to send it just to you.
That's okay. I don't think people you're gonna be receiving stuff in the mail.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the book.
Sure. I hope you enjoy it.
Oh, I will. You have a good day, ma'am. Thank you for
Thanks.
this.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, Renee Gordon. All right, I just want to make sure. I think we have all 5. Okay, bye everybody. Oh. Okay, all right, Ashley. Did you put your email in this? Yeah, there you go. Okay. Okay, ending it now. Hope to see you next week.